Joining us now, Victoria political consultant Michael Geoghegan. Mr. Geoghegan, what made the difference yesterday?
Well, I think essentially this was in some ways the Seinfeld election. It was an election about nothing, but at the same time, the message that Premier Gordon Campbell gave of, look, steady hand on the tiller, we're in economically very troubled times, now's not the time to hand the keys of the province over to the NDP, that message resonated with enough voters to give him a third mandate, which makes him only the third Premier in British Columbia's history to ever do that.
Were the pollsters wrong? Because we were hearing as late as yesterday that it was they were head-to-head.
You know, this race was actually surprisingly close. I mean, it ended up being virtually a repeat of the last election in terms of actual results. Although, interestingly enough, voter participation rates significantly declined. It's now less than half of BCers bothered to vote. And but, you know, I think the polls reflected the fact that there was a lot of indifference to this election.
Was the Liberal Party the most small C Conservative Party contesting seats yesterday in BC?
Well, there were a handful of actual Conservatives who were running as Conservatives, but yeah, pretty much they were the small C Conservative Party. You know, they were a center-right party, the NDP, the left-wing party, and then you had the Greens. But interestingly enough, there was also an independent. They're going to have to go to a judicial recount because she came within 2 votes of unseating the incumbent Attorney General here in British Columbia.
2 votes. That's Wally Opal you're talking about?
Wally Opal, and the independent running in Delta South has, so far the vote tally has her only 2 votes behind him.
Do you see here further evidence of an old bromide in politics that in a troubled economic sea, the boats looking for the safe port tend to go Conservative?
Well, yeah.
As much as you may like or admire the agenda of the more liberal or left-wing parties, you want to protect the buck first.
Absolutely. I mean, the NDP, the hangover they still have is from the 1990s and Glenn Clark, where investment fled the province. And enough British Columbians remembered that they were nervous in terms of handing Carol James a majority government, with the exception of Vancouver Island, where the NDP won all but a handful of seats on Vancouver Island. But the rest of British Columbia voted fairly solidly for the Liberals. But I think it also shows that there's also a great disaffection and dissatisfaction with politics. I mean, British Columbia used to be known for its colorful political characters, and now, you know, maybe it's because of the internet or whatever. I mean, our political candidates have gotten more and more boring, for lack of a better word. and I mean, I think it's a point now where in British Columbia, our politicians are actually less interesting than those in Ontario, which, you know, who would have thought the day would ever come? And I think it's a situation where British Columbians really are calling out for a change in the sense, not in terms of STV, which was handily defeated, but they're calling out for they want MLAs who are allowed to be MLAs. They're tired of seeing MLAs who just do everything that the leader wants, whether it's opposition or government. And I think that's reflected in how well Vicky Huntington did in terms of almost unseating Wally Opal. And I think that's also reflected in the fact that voter turnout was only 49%.
Mr. Geoghegan, I can tell you that for a guy who does not live in BC, I follow what happens there relatively closely, and I know what the issues have been. I've just made a quick list of them here. The Olympics is an issue, the environment always an issue in BC, healthcare, of course, the downtown east side of Vancouver. All these things keep popping up and percolating on the political scene, but are you saying that yesterday there was, in fact, only one issue, and that was the economy?
Well, the economy was the decisive issue, and in terms of the environment, it was really interesting because Premier Gordon Campbell very successfully outmaneuvered the NDP on the environment. The NDP had the Campbell government had introduced a carbon tax. The NDP had promised to repeal it, and that had a number of leading environmentalists, including David Suzuki and Sephora Berman, actually coming out and slamming the NDP politically in the first week of the campaign. So in terms of a clear sort of left-right, green, anti-green message, I mean, you know, there was real discussion about who is the more green candidate, and so some would argue we actually had 3 green parties running in this province.
Michael Geoghegan is a political consultant in Victoria, BC. Thank you very much for your time, sir. Appreciate it.